Welcome to the USAIM's How-To video on entering unit remarks and endangered species sightings. From the home screen, you will click the ATON tile. Once the correct record is selected, you will scroll down to the remarks section and open it for editing. Click the plus sign to create a new record. You will enter the verbose remarks in accordance with the ATON Administration Manual. From here, there are a few mandatory fields that you need to fill out. The first is to determine whether or not on-site maintenance was performed. In most cases, this will be yes, but in some cases, you may enter an administrative remark only. The next mandatory field is the reason for visit. In this case, we conducted a discrepancy response. You will need to indicate whether or not dragging or wire sweeping was performed, whether or not any equipment was lost on the bottom, whether or not the anchor was used, whether or not spuds were used, and finally, whether or not an endangered species was sighted during the maintenance. Click the Save button to record the record. The process for a fixed aid is the same, with a few additional fields to note. Again, we will open the remarks for editing and hit the plus sign to create a new record. For fixed aids, we'll need to indicate whether or not pile driving was performed, and if so, how many piles were installed, as well as what material the piles were made out of. We'll also need to indicate whether or not pile removal was performed as part of the activity. Another thing to note is what the installation method was. In most cases, this will be an impact hammer, but in some cases it may be different equipment such as a vibratory hammer. We'll also need to note whether or not sound attenuation devices were used. Again, we'll have the mandatory fields as to whether or not equipment was lost on the bottom or the anchor was used, and whether or not spuds were used, and if so, how many. In this instance, let's say that we did have an endangered species sighting. You'll need to indicate whether or not that sighting resulted in a delay to your activity. In this case, we saw a North Atlantic right whale that surfaced and then swam away. We'll indicate that we delayed our maintenance, our pile installation, to lessen the impact on the species. We'll also need to indicate whether or not the sighting was in vicinity of AP. In most cases it will be, but in some cases you might be in between aids as if you were working up the channel. Finally, you'll indicate the distance at which you sighted the species and what particular species you sighted. Click Save to record the remarks. Whoops, we missed something. In this case, we forgot to record the date and time of the observation, which may be different than the date time of when you are entering this remark. All set. Thank you for listening.